Hi, this is my history project, the History of Homestead. I chose this project because I grew up around Homestead, and I think it's really interesting, the historical past that it has and the importance that it played in the development of Pittsburgh and the surrounding areas of Pittsburgh. The early days. The history of Homestead starts off in the early 1770s. This is when the first settlers began to live in the area. The area was used for farmland for roughly 100 years. It did not receive a town charter until 1880. Roughly around this time is when the industry started to work its way into the Homestead area. In 1881, the first iron mill began a period of rapid growth and prosperity in this area, beginning its home for steelmaking. This empire was started by Carnegie when he officially bought the mills in 1883. The official purchase of the mills began Homestead's period of prosperity and growth. The Homestead Strike. The Homestead Steel Strike is when Henry Clay Frick refused to sign a new agreement with the workers to give them better wages and better lives. The mill workers were locked out of the mills, and the Pinkerton Guards were called in to force them out. The people of Homestead and the disgruntled workers actually stood up to the Pinkerton Guards and met them on the banks of the Monongahela River. And this is when shots were fired. It's not known which side shot first, but there were 11 casualties, and the National Guard actually had to be called in to stop the violence and respond to the casualties and the injuries. It eventually became known as the Battle of Homestead and led to the formation of the Union. An interesting fact about the Homestead Steel Strike is that the actual landing location of the Pinkerton Guards, where the battles of Homestead actually took place, is by the pump house, which is located today right past Lowe's. And you can visit the pump house, and it's very interesting. Unions. After the Homestead Steel Strike, the unions were officially founded. The union was actually first started in Pittsburgh, and it was to fight for better wages, better working conditions, and just in general a better life for the workers. The formation of the unions led to rapid growth in the Homestead area, and many people were employed, and the unemployment rate was very, very low. Asserting the claim to steel. Over half the population of Homestead actually worked in the steel mills, and Homestead also was a cultivation of many cultures and was very prosperous throughout the 1900s. During this time, when half the population was employed at the mills, several different cultures were being brought together: African Americans, Native Americans, Asians, Hispanics, whites. It was just a very prominent time for people to be working together, no matter their race, despite the segregation laws that were currently in development and the cruel racism that was continuing throughout this time period. And Homestead had officially asserted its claim to the steel industry. Segregation. During the time of segregation, Homestead played a pivotal role due to the new popularity of American baseball. The area of Homestead was extremely popular because many African Americans were not able to play in the major league, and Homestead actually started one of the first Negro leagues and had one of the best teams, the Homestead Grays. They were established in 1912 by Cumberland Posey and played 38 consecutive seasons. They played all of their home games at Forbes Field, which was the Pirates' home field, and they went on to win 3 titles in the Negro League World Series, and created a thick history of baseball and segregation in the area of Homestead. The city that won the war. As the years went on and the steel industry continued to thrive, a new demand had to be met. As the 1930s came to a close, the world got closer and closer to the threat of war. As the forefront for the steel industry in the United States, Homestead and the rest of the city of Pittsburgh were going to be called upon to help protect the U.S. Not only did they meet the expectation, but they exceeded it. As a spirit of true patriotism ran through the city, and especially through Homestead, the steel mills were being operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they were the primary suppliers of steel for the Pacific Fleet. Homestead was responsible for the production of 95 million tons of steel, which truly helped the war effort and showed a true spirit of patriotism in Homestead. This success and patriotism, however, led to a very sad time for Homestead: the decline. There was no longer a need for the mass production of steel as the war was over. Several of the mills that were not being used had to close down. And in the early 60s and 70s, there were cheaper options for steel, and the Homestead steel mills could not compete. They stayed open for a few more years and were able to punch more of a legacy into the town, but eventually they all closed down. This is when Homestead began its transition from a steel town to a retail town, from steel to stores, the bustling 8th Avenue. As many of the local Pittsburghers know, 8th Avenue used to be a bustling retail district that actually attracted people from all parts of the city. During this period of time, 8th Avenue saw great success. The economy was bustling and had officially made its switch from steel to stores. It was a hard transition for the town, but most of the people were resilient and were able to be successful. However, this was all going to change, and no one knew it. My parents actually used to do most of their shopping with their families on 8th Avenue. It's where they would do their grocery shopping, their clothing shopping, their school supplies, everything. 8th Avenue was absolutely one of the best places to be. On a side note, I've actually been in the exact location where this picture was taken. You can hold it up and match it up to the buildings because they are still standing till this day. Sadly, 8th Avenue lost its popularity to the waterfront. The waterfront was a new plan to redevelop the famous site of the Carnegie Steelworks. It was a sad time for Homestead because it was entering the future and no one was really ready for it. The price tag of the waterfront actually was $25 million. It was a new era of technology that was coming, but it was able to pay tribute to the past mills and in a very interesting way. The construction of the waterfront actually led to the developers leaving the most iconic part of the Carnegie Works, which were the smokestacks. Many people know what these smokestacks are and remember growing up around them, such as myself. After the project was confirmed, they began development. It took several years for the waterfront to be finished, but in 1999 it was officially opened and the town square was open to the public. And the waterfront had officially became the place to be. Remembering its roots. Homestead is one of the most iconic places in Pittsburgh, and you can still see some of its very historical buildings and landmarks today. The first example is the pump house, shown in this image right here. The pump house marks the location of the Pinkerton Guards where they landed on the banks of Homestead and where the people stood up to them. Theoretically, this is where the Battle of Homestead took place. The smokestacks. The smokestacks along the far end of the waterfront are the most iconic part of the Carnegie steel mills and truly had a special place in the hearts of workers from the mills, and most of them still recognize exactly where the other locations of the buildings were to this day. It shows a true pride for the hard work of homesteaders, a very interesting place to be able to visit. I encourage all people to go and visit the pump house and the landing spot. This has been the History of Homestead.